Everyone thinks they know the story of Judas Iscariot. He's the one who, for 30 pieces of silver, handed Jesus over to the soldiers. A traitor, a coward, a name that became synonymous with betrayal to this day. But what if I told you there's another side to this story, one you were never taught? What if behind the official version lies a much deeper mystery? A choice not just human but spiritual. Something so disturbing it was buried for centuries, silenced by the guardians of the faith. This isn't just another chapter in Christian history. It's a direct confrontation with everything you thought was true. In the canonical Gospels, like Matthew 26:14-16, Judas is portrayed as one of the 12 who approaches the priests to negotiate Jesus' betrayal. The story is simple. He takes the money and sets the plan in motion. But what drives someone so close to the Messiah to make such an extreme decision? Was it just greed? Or was there something more? That question has long haunted theologians, scholars, and even artists who tried to fill the gaps with speculation. But the truth was hidden in an ancient manuscript, a text rejected, ignored, and even labeled heresy by many, the Gospel of Judas. Discovered in Egypt in 1978 and dated to the 2nd century AD, the Gospel of Judas is part of a manuscript collection known as the Codex Chakos, and it contains a revelation that changes everything. According to the text, Judas was not a traitor. He was, in fact, the only disciple who truly understood Jesus' mission. Not an enemy, but the chosen one, tasked with carrying out the most painful and sacred plan. Jesus himself, according to this gospel, told Judas, "You will exceed all of them, for you will sacrifice the man that clothes me." Gospel of Judas, verse 56. That doesn't sound like an accusation. It sounds like an instruction. This perspective flips everything upside down. Instead of a traitor, we see an instrument of divine will, a disciple who, out of love, accepts the burden of being hated for generations. Imagine that. Judas didn't betray out of greed, but out of obedience. He understood something the others couldn't. According to this gospel, Jesus' mission wasn't just to die. It was to free the divine spirit from the human body, to return to the celestial realm. And only someone willing to bear the weight of infamy could help fulfill that mission. This isn't just shocking, it's transformative. But why was this story silenced? Why wasn't it included in the biblical canon, finalized centuries later at the Council of Carthage in 397 AD? The answer may lie in the power of narrative. A religion that needed clear martyrs and heroes couldn't afford to humanize the traitor. Good had to be separated from evil with clean lines. Judas was necessary as a villain, so Jesus could shine as the perfect victim. Adding nuance was dangerous. It would suggest that God's plan included pain, doubt, sacrifice, and even betrayal as a sacred instrument. But who would be ready for that? This dilemma leads us to a deeper question. What is betrayal in the eyes of God? Is human judgment enough to condemn someone for eternity? Or is there a spiritual justice that goes far beyond what we can understand? The Gospel of Judas challenges us to rethink not only Judas's role, but the entire structure of what we call salvation, mission, and obedience. It forces us to face the discomfort that not everything is black and white, that the chosen one might just be the one who carries the burden of rejection. Of course, this version stirs resistance. Many theologians label it as Gnostic, a tradition deemed heretical by early church fathers like Irenaeus of Lyon, who condemned this gospel as false and blasphemous as early as the 2nd century. But why such fear of a text that simply offers another perspective? What's so threatening about this version? Maybe it's the idea that the divine doesn't fit into human rules, that God's plan doesn't follow the morality of this world, and that the deepest secrets of faith are often hidden in the stories we refuse to hear. Judas may not have been the villain, but the bravest of all the disciples. The only one willing to fulfill a necessary role, even if it meant being hated for all eternity. And if this version is true, what else lies hidden in the shadows of history? How many other stories were shaped to comfort, not to reveal? Thinking about that may be unsettling, but it's also liberating. If this reflection stirred something in you, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to follow the next revelations, make sure to subscribe, because what's coming goes even deeper. Throughout Christian history, the 12 apostles have been elevated to an almost sacred status. Peter, John, James, all remembered for their devotion, courage, and closeness to Jesus. But Judas, although part of that same inner circle, was forever branded as the disgraced one. Yet the Gospel of Judas offers a radical idea. He may have been the only one among the 12 who didn't fall for the illusion. While the other disciples worshipped a more physical and human Jesus, Judas is portrayed as the one who understood the eternal spirit residing within that body, a vision that completely transforms his image, from traitor to the only one who could truly see beyond appearances. This contrast becomes clear when we compare excerpts from the Gospel of Judas with the canonical Gospels. In John 13:27, for example, we read that Satan entered into Judas after Jesus handed him the bread. The traditional narrative ties his actions to absolute evil, but in the Gospel of Judas, Jesus calls him the 13th spirit, the one who would surpass the others. The number 13, historically cursed, here takes on a symbolic meaning. Judas is marginalized because he represents something that breaks the established order, a liminal figure between human and divine, between the earthly realm and the celestial. As we examine the manuscript more deeply, we see that Jesus distances himself from the other disciples. He criticizes them for failing to understand his true nature and for offering useless sacrifices. But with Judas, he shares his most profound secrets. In a revealing passage, Jesus says, "The star that leads them has gone astray, but you, Judas, will outshine them all." Gospel of Judas, verse 46. That line carries immense symbolic weight. Judas becomes the bearer of the true light, even if misunderstood. An unavoidable parallel emerges. Lucifer, whose name originally means light bringer, but unlike the fallen angel, Judas does not rebel. He accepts the most difficult order of all. That's where destiny's script grows heavier. Imagine the agony of knowing you will be hated, rejected, erased from the memory of faith, and still choosing to fulfill your mission. In this narrative, Judas is almost a reverse martyr. He doesn't die as a victim, he lives as a scandal. The Gospel of Judas shows Jesus laughing at the other disciples when they pray, because they understand nothing. But with Judas, he's serious. The tone shifts. There's respect. There's surrender. There's a silent pact that transcends common logic. That special connection suggests something few are ready to accept: the existence of a secret alliance between master and disciple. As controversial as it may sound, this idea echoes in other Gnostic texts discovered in Nag Hammadi. Writings like the Gospel of Thomas or the Gospel of Mary also point to an inner wisdom that few ever attain. In Judas's case, he becomes the ultimate Gnostic disciple, the one who understands that salvation doesn't come through blind worship, but through understanding hidden truth. It's possible this version was suppressed precisely because it challenged a model of faith built on guilt, fear, and blind obedience. By breaking free from that model, Judas became dangerous, not because he was evil, but because he was awake. Historically, the name Judas has become a symbol of betrayal across cultures. Even the word itself carries weight. In many languages, to be a Judas means to betray. But if this alternative version is true, then that legacy reveals a deliberate cultural strategy to suppress divergent knowledge. Keeping Judas as the villain meant keeping the faith within controllable boundaries. The Gnostic version, however, invites thought, doubt, introspection. And for many religious leaders of the time, that was more dangerous than any explicit heresy. It's disturbing to imagine that everything we've learned may have been built on omissions, and yet, it's freeing to know that other lenses exist, lenses through which we can see the same facts differently. Judas doesn't need to be canonized, but maybe he deserves to be understood. Perhaps his figure represents the deepest duality of the human spirit, one who loves truth so much, he accepts being hated for it. And that silent sacrifice, might be more sacred than 1,000 empty declarations of faith. In this light, Judas becomes the mirror the church itself has long avoided. Maybe Judas was exactly what we all fear becoming, someone who obeys truth, even when it demands the sacrifice of one's own reputation. That idea makes us uncomfortable, but it also sparks a deeper question. How many times have you been misunderstood for following something greater? How many truths have you silenced just to avoid rejection? If that struck something within you, don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts in the comments. You may help someone else see the light. And if you feel ready to explore what's hidden between the lines of faith, subscribe, because the next chapter dives even deeper. What if the crucifixion of Jesus wasn't just a sacrifice, but a carefully planned liberation? In the Gospel of Judas, that idea is central. Death is not a defeat, nor a political religious accident. It is the climax of a spiritual journey. Jesus is said to have come into the world clothed in flesh only for a time, and his true mission was to liberate the divine spirit dwelling in his mortal body. And for that to happen, someone had to deliver the body. That someone wasn't an enemy, but a silent ally, Judas Iscariot. In the most controversial passage of the Gospel of Judas, Jesus says, "You will sacrifice the man who clothes me," verse 56. This line carries immense theological weight. The man is the physical body, and clothes me suggests that Jesus' true identity is not carnal, but spiritual. This idea is deeply Gnostic. The body is a prison, and the spirit is what must be set free. Judas, then, doesn't act against Jesus. He acts in service of the divine essence's liberation. That turns the traditional narrative upside down and challenges the very foundation of what we call salvation. This doctrine, that the spirit must be freed from the body, was common among Gnostics of the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Texts like the Gospel of Thomas and Pistis Sophia reinforce the idea that inner knowledge, not physical suffering, is the true path to ascension. Jesus' mission then wasn't to die for the world's sins, but to awaken sleeping consciousnesses, and Judas, as the agent of this liberation, becomes essential. He's not the mistake, he's the key to transcendence. And that's hard to accept in a world used to clearly defined martyrs and villains. This scenario even challenges official theology. If Christ's goal was to be freed from the body, then Judas's action aligns with that outcome. That undermines the image of Judas as greedy or possessed by evil. And more, it suggests Judas had access to a level of understanding that the other disciples never reached. In the Gospel of Judas, the other apostles are portrayed as misguided, trapped in material worship and unable to grasp the true kingdom, which is not of this world. See Ephraim's Gospel of Judas, verses 33-36. This division between wisdom and ignorance makes Judas the pivot of a monumental secret. That secret, however, couldn't be accepted by all. The early church, in its effort to unify doctrine and expand authority, rejected Gnostic texts as elitist and heretical. After all, the idea that truth is reserved for the initiated created a dangerous spiritual hierarchy. Recasting Judas as the only one who understood Jesus' true mission would make him the symbol of that spiritual elite. And for a faith built on the premise of universal access through belief, not gnosis, that was unacceptable. Rejecting Judas, then, became a way to maintain narrative control. Still, echoes of that view persist. Great thinkers like Carl Jung saw Judas as necessary for the wholeness of Christ. Jung viewed him as the dark side of the archetype, the rejected part that must be integrated for there to be completion. This psychological lens aligns perfectly with the Gnostic one. Judas is the shadow, but also the bridge. He carries the weight of all those who were misunderstood for following something beyond common morality. To bring this to light today is more than an act of faith. It's an invitation to spiritual maturity. In this new vision, Judas's kiss is not betrayal, it's ritual. It seals a silent agreement between two beings who understand that there is something more beyond visible pain. It's the moment the plan begins, the instant of conscious sacrifice, and perhaps the greatest act of trust Jesus ever made in his journey. Entrusting the most divine task to a man the world would hate, that changes everything. Because if Judas was chosen, then everything we thought we knew about good and evil must be re-examined, and that could be the beginning of an entirely new understanding of faith. Perhaps the true miracle is realizing that salvation doesn't only come from the light, but from the darkness that accepted its role. Judas never asked for glory. He didn't demand recognition. He simply acted, like someone who knows that truth doesn't always shine. Sometimes it hides in the silence of the misunderstood. If this struck something within you, maybe it's worth sharing. Because someone out there may also be trying to understand the words we've been taught to silence. Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep exploring this hidden path with us, subscribe. We're only beginning to uncover the mystery. Since the earliest centuries of Christianity, the Church faced a dilemma: how to unify so many different interpretations of Jesus and his mission. Dozens of Gospels circulated among communities, many with complex, even contradictory visions. The Gospel of Judas was one of them. It presented a bold narrative, a deep theology, and a message that directly challenged the model of faith built on blind obedience. The issue wasn't just what Judas did, it was what he revealed, that spiritual truth doesn't reside in appearances or institutions, but in the knowledge that sets us free. This idea of gnosis, revealed spiritual knowledge, was dangerous. In the Gospel of Judas, the other apostles are portrayed as misguided, following a shallow form of faith. They continue worshiping a lower God, tied to the material world, and offer sacrifices that Jesus condemns. Judas, in contrast, is the one who understands that the true God is beyond visible creation, and that the kingdom is not of this world. Gospel of Judas, verses 34 to 36. This vision directly clashes with the structure the church was building, a religion of temples, dogmas, and visible authority. For the Gnostics, and especially in the Gospel of Judas, the body is not sacred. It is temporary. It is a prison. This collides with the belief in the literal resurrection of the dead, a central pillar of traditional Christian theology. And here's the key point. If Jesus' body wasn't the goal, but the obstacle, then the crucifixion wasn't martyrdom. It was a strategic spiritual release. And who enabled it? Judas. This shatters one of the emotional foundations of mainstream Christianity, the idea of suffering as atonement. In this view, Judas becomes the agent of liberation, not of sin. Understanding this isn't easy or comfortable. After all, we've been taught since childhood that Judas is the ultimate villain. Questioning that feels like betraying the faith itself. But what if it's the opposite? What if true faith isn't built on certainty, but on the courage to revisit what we've been taught as untouchable? Jesus said in John 8:32, "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." But which truth? The one that comforts, or the one that unsettles before it frees? Maybe Judas was the messenger of that second kind of truth. That's why the Gospel of Judas was excluded, condemned, and nearly erased from history. Irenaeus of Lyon, in his Against Heresies, c. 180 AD, denounced it fiercely, calling it a blasphemous account written by men who worship the traitor. To him, accepting this gospel would mean dismantling the foundation of Christian faith. But was that rejection truly theological or political? The image of Judas as a hero forced people to accept that God's plan doesn't follow human logic, and that suffering might be a mission, not a punishment. That was too dangerous for a church beginning to centralize power. Historically, this is what always happens when a powerful narrative threatens the established order. Books are burned, voices are silenced, characters are rewritten. Judas may have been one of those victims. Downgraded from initiate to traitor, he becomes the archetype of the excluded one who knows too much. The same happened with Mary Magdalene, reduced to a prostitute when Gnostic texts described her as a leader and Jesus' spiritual confidant. Both, Judas and Mary, were turned into shadows by the official narrative, because their stories threatened the balance of power. The Gospel of Judas is not just a reinterpretation. It's an accusation, a mirror held up to the superficiality of institutionalized faith. It reveals that most people worship what they see, while truth resides in what is invisible. It questions rituals, sacrifices, priests, everything that keeps people bound to external systems. Judas, upon realizing this, walks away. He doesn't worship, he doesn't follow, he understands. And because of that, he acts, not as a rebel, but as one who obeys something far deeper, the inner revelation that doesn't fit into dogma. Maybe that's why this gospel remained buried for so long. Not because it was false, but because it was too powerful to be accepted, too powerful to fit within the limits imposed by tradition. Judas may have revealed a truth we're still not ready to accept. But the question remains, are we ready to think for ourselves? Or do we still prefer stories where good and evil are neatly labeled, even if that means living in illusion? If this made you reflect, share your thoughts. Your voice might be the spark someone else needs to awaken. And if you're ready to keep walking this path of hidden truths, subscribe. The next revelation strikes at the very heart of faith itself. When we think of judgment, we think of justice. But what if that judgment is based on an incomplete story? Judas Iscariot was condemned by history, by the altars, by tradition. No other biblical figure carries such symbolic weight. He wasn't just excluded, he was cursed. His name became an insult. His memory reduced to a handful of silver coins. But who actually judged Judas? Was it God? Was it Jesus? Or was it us? And the most uncomfortable question of all, on what basis did we judge him? What do we truly know about him beyond the version told by the canonical Gospels? In the New Testament, there's tension between condemnation and destiny. In Matthew 26:24, Jesus says, "The Son of Man will go as it is written about him. But woe to that man who betrays the Son of Man. It would be better for him if he had not been born." A harsh sentence, but it points to something deeper. Judas's role was foretold. He was part of the divine script. This creates a paradox. If he fulfilled what was already written, then God's plan required his action. And if it was necessary, did he fail or did he obey? Here lies a question no dogma has ever resolved with certainty. Even the act of the infamous kiss of betrayal, described in Luke 22:47-48, deserves a second look. Judas kisses Jesus, a gesture of affection, and that kiss becomes the signal that leads to the Messiah's arrest. But what if, from a Gnostic perspective, that kiss was symbolic, a mystical act of surrender, a silent ritual between the two of them? In the Gospel of Judas, this action takes on a different meaning, the conscious sacrifice of the body so the spirit can be freed. The kiss isn't betrayal, it's a sacred sign, a pact, a gesture that could only come from someone entirely devoted to the mission. Tradition tells us that Judas hanged himself, consumed by remorse, Matthew 27:5. A tragic, quick, painful end. But even that has alternative interpretations. Remorse can reflect guilt, or the unbearable weight of completing something no one would ever understand. A lonely burden. In some apocryphal and Gnostic versions, Judas doesn't take his own life. Instead, he disappears, like someone who fulfilled their purpose and simply exits the stage. Whatever the version, one thing is clear. Judas suffers. He doesn't celebrate. He gains nothing. He is consumed by the role he played, and that alone humanizes him. For centuries, philosophers and theologians have wrestled with one question. Did Judas act out of free will or destiny? Dante placed him in the deepest circle of hell, alongside Brutus and Cassius. But others, like the Swiss theologian Hans Urs von Balthasar, dared to ask, what if Judas was saved? What if he understood something no one else could grasp? Augustine once said that God can even use human sin to bring about greater good. If that's true, then what about Judas, who set in motion the very event that defines Christian faith? Could he have been an irreplaceable piece of the divine puzzle? This ambiguity is unsettling, because it breaks the comfortable binary of right and wrong. Judas, in this new light, represents the gray zone of spirituality. He's the symbol of silent obedience that defies public judgment, and this hits close to home. How many times have you been misunderstood for doing what you believed was right? How often has your loyalty been mistaken for betrayal? Judas is the mirror of difficult decisions. He reflects the choices no one wants to make, but that are necessary for the story to move forward. Judas confronts us with a brutal question. Is it possible to be on the right side and still be hated by everyone? Jesus himself said in Luke 6:22, "Blessed are you when people hate you, because of the Son of Man." Was this an indirect reference to those who obey in silence? Judas is the ultimate anti-hero, and for that reason, perhaps the most human of them all. He doesn't become a legend. He doesn't start a church. He disappears, maybe because his role was never to be remembered, only to fulfill what needed to be done. If Judas was a key figure in God's plan, then our condemnation may have been premature, and maybe, in judging him so harshly, we've denied the very complexity that makes faith real. Because faith is not just light, it's also shadow, doubt, silence, and surrender. Judas carries all of that. He is the part of the story we prefer to forget, but must finally face. If this stirred something in you, share your thoughts. Your words might be the bridge that helps someone else understand. And if you want to keep walking with me through this journey of hidden truths and sacred contradictions, subscribe. We haven't yet reached the most intense part of the path. Judas is a name that echoes like a curse in every corner of Christian history. But what if he never spoke? Because he couldn't. What if Judas's silence was part of the mission itself? In none of the Gospels does he try to justify himself. No letters, no speeches, no public lament. Unlike Peter, who denies and then weeps, Judas simply acts and remains silent. That silence, far from cowardice, may be the deepest symbol of surrender and trust. Those who carry out secret missions, those who bear burdens no one else would understand, don't seek applause. They simply fulfill their purpose. And maybe Judas knew his explanation would never be heard. In the Gospel of Judas, Jesus prepares him in advance. They step away from the other disciples. There is an intimate, private dialogue filled with symbols, visions, and revelations. It's as if Jesus were initiating Judas into something the others could never comprehend. One of the most mysterious passages shows Jesus saying, "You will surpass them all, for you will sacrifice the man who clothes me." Gospel of Judas, verse 56. This verse suggests that Judas not only accepted the mission, he was the only one worthy of receiving it. It's a disturbing thought, but also liberating. The heaviest burden was given to the most conscious soul. This kind of silence resonates throughout mystical spirituality. In many traditions, the initiated don't reveal what they know. They hold it. They protect it. They suffer in silence. The path of deep knowledge and inner revelation is, by nature, a lonely one. Judas may have become a symbol of that. Someone who saw the invisible, understood the unspeakable, and, because of that, chose to disappear so that a greater plan could unfold. His name, then, is not just shadow. It becomes a seal, a sign that true faith demands renunciation, even of one's own image. Judas's silence can also be seen as a profound critique of institutional religion. While the other disciples went on preaching, founding churches, and being celebrated as saints, Judas built nothing external. He left no public legacy. He didn't seek crowds. And that's unsettling, because modern spirituality is used to visible leaders, loud voices, and platforms of influence. Judas, in that sense, is the hidden disciple, the one who serves, completes his task, and vanishes. Like the great masters who leave no monuments, only traces in the lives of those who truly saw them. Esoteric traditions across religions speak of such figures, bearers of hidden knowledge who sacrifice themselves for the collective. In Judaism, there's the concept of the 36 righteous ones, Lamed Vav Tzadikim, unknown, just men whose silent actions uphold the world. In apocryphal Christianity, Judas may hold that role, the misunderstood just man, the initiate who took upon himself the blame so that others could carry the light. And that changes everything, because in this new perspective, the traitor doesn't betray, he sacrifices, and silence becomes his highest form of prayer. That's why so many thinkers across the centuries have looked at Judas with new eyes. Jorge Luis Borges wrote that Judas was the mirror of Christ, and that his humiliation was just as sacred as the cross. Kazantzakis, in The Last Temptation of Christ, also explored that radical surrender. In this vision, Judas becomes the human who accepts being erased, so that truth might shine. He is the symbol of mature faith, one that doesn't need recognition to exist. And that shakes our immediate, glory-driven spirituality, always hungry for applause and clear answers. Reconsidering Judas, then, is more than revisiting a story. It is a spiritual exercise. It is facing the discomfort that truth may come dressed as error. It is accepting that God's path can run through places that seem dark. Judas invites us to see faith beyond moralism and appearances. He reminds us that the invisible can be more powerful than the visible, and that true surrender makes no noise. It simply acts, even if it's never understood. Maybe Judas said more with his silence than many ever said with words. Maybe his lack of defense was the ultimate proof of the purity of his mission. And maybe within each of us, there is a part that has felt like him, misunderstood, rejected, yet steadfast in something greater. If that silence spoke to you, leave your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes what's left unsaid weighs more than 1,000 speeches. And if you want to keep uncovering these forgotten voices of faith, subscribe, because in the final chapter, we'll reveal what few dare even to imagine. For centuries, Judas's story has been told as a warning. He is the traitor, the symbol of unforgivable error, the one who fell. But when we revisit the apocryphal texts, the Gnostic writings, and even the hidden layers of the New Testament, another figure emerges. A man who didn't betray out of weakness, but out of mission. A disciple who carried the burden of being hated, so a greater plan could unfold. You can't walk away from this journey unchanged. Either you deny everything you've discovered, or accept that the truth of faith is more complex, deeper, and more human than what you were taught. In this new narrative, Judas is no longer the villain. He becomes the living paradox. He is light and shadow. He is the necessary and the rejected. In John 17:12, Jesus calls him the son of perdition, but the context is ambiguous. Is it condemnation or acknowledgement that he fulfilled the hardest part of the plan? In the Gospel of Judas, his role is clear. He is the only one who understands, the only one who sees beyond. He is not guided by the material world, but by something higher, and that sets him apart, isolates him, transforms him into the silent guardian of a truth that could not be revealed until the time was right. This vision shakes the binary structure of faith. Heroes versus villains, saints versus traitors. Judas forces us to see spirituality as a journey filled with gray zones, where obedience to truth may mean rejection by man. It invites reflection. How many people today are judged for the roles they quietly accepted? How many missions have been mistaken for failures? Judas becomes the archetype of the sacred misunderstood, the one who agreed to be forgotten so light could be born from darkness. And that light, according to Gnostic texts, doesn't come from outside. It rises from within. The Gospel of Judas offers no easy comfort. It doesn't declare what's right or wrong. It invites us to plunge into the mystery of the soul, into a divine connection that cannot be institutionalized. It denounces blind worship, empty rituals, robotic faith, and it presents Judas as the symbol of a burning, silent faith, one that chooses the hardest path, the path of renunciation. He doesn't need temples, because he becomes an altar of misunderstood sacrifice. The exclusion of this gospel from the canon wasn't just doctrinal. It was the silencing of doubt, complexity, and deep thought. Judas was erased because he represents what is too hard to accept, that God's plan may pass through pain, that the chosen one might be hated, that faith demands the courage to abandon comfort, and that sometimes true loyalty means doing what the world would unanimously condemn. That is mature faith, the kind that needs no applause, only awareness. In the end, this story isn't just about Judas. It's about us, about the roles we take on without being understood, about the faith we carry in silence, about the times we've been misjudged for following what we believed in. Judas is mirror and challenge. He shows us that salvation might come through the darkest path, that true love demands total surrender, even of one's name, and that there's greatness in the pain of those who aren't remembered, but were essential. To restore Judas isn't to rewrite the gospel. It's to finally read it in full. It's to accept that Christian faith is vast, mysterious, and that God's light may shine even in the places we were told held only darkness. And if Judas was the closest to Jesus, the most understanding, the most obedient, then maybe we've been wrong for 2,000 years. And that's okay, because faith is also this: to restart, to re-see, to honor what was forgotten, and to keep going, not in fear, but in truth. If Judas truly was the silent chosen one, then it's time to lift the veil from his story, to make space for a faith that is more than dogma, a faith of seeking, courage, and depth. If this journey touched something in you, leave your thoughts in the comments. This space belongs to you too. And if you want to follow me into the next forgotten story, perhaps even more shocking, subscribe, because sometimes what was hidden is exactly what we most need to remember.